let's do this again. Nope, stop. So last week we talked about OAuth, the protocol to delegate authentication. We talked about using a service called Auth0. Right, so OAuth is the protocol, OpenAuth, OAuth, and Auth0 is the service we're going to use to handle OAuth for us. So this guide, which is in that same folder I posted in Slack, assumes two things. It assumes you created an API-only style Rails application, which you all should be doing. And it also assumes that you're using React Router in your React client, right? Which you probably all should be doing. So this is going to walk through the implementation side of what Mark showed last week. The code is going to be a little bit different than his talk if he recorded it, because we've since refactored the code that Auth0 shares with you. So the code that Mark showed last week is the default code, sample code that Auth0 provides. And sample code, it's not great. So we've taken that and we refactored it, and it's included in here. So you saw some code last week to handle Auth and Auth0, and you're going to see most of the same but slightly improved version of that today. So one of the first things we have to do in order to use Auth0 is to log in or sign up to Auth0. So at some point you are going to go to auth0.com and sign up for an account. You're going to make your own Auth0 account. And now, see, here's the problem. What did I log in with? Let's see, did I use a username and password?
What do you suggest we use?
I probably logged in with my GitHub. If it's a developer's tool and it gives me the option to log in with GitHub, I probably logged in with GitHub. Yes, I logged in with GitHub because I can see all my various logins. So once you create your account, right, authenticate in with GitHub, what we're going to do is we are going to, the very first time you sign up, it's going to ask you to choose a domain name, right? You probably want something like your name, right? It's kind of like signing up for a GitHub. You want to use something that's identifiable to you. If it asks you to choose a domain name, like mine is like gstark, right? Like your first initial last name, right? Probably don't use something really weird. Use something sort of straightforward, name and initial, first name and last name, etc. When it's time for your capstone project name, that's going to be the application. So I created my domain name as gstark. Because I already have an account that didn't walk me through that, you'll be asked that question the first time you create an account.
I just was wondering, would it make sense to maybe name it the name of our capstone project?
No.
Okay.
Your domain is like your account.
Okay.
Your application is like your capstone project. So in one domain, you're going to have many applications. So you want like your name, and then you'll see here, once you create an application, right, it's going to give us some choices. We're going to choose single page application. Right, we're going to choose single page application, and we're going to name our app up here SDG capstone, whatever you're going to call your application, right? Like what's yours called, Anastasia? You got a cute name for your app?
Sweet Tweets.
Yeah, so this would be Sweet Tweets.
Yep, exactly.
Right? Your domain name is like your initials, right? gstark, but your application name will be like your capstone name. So let's call this SDG class demo. Right? And we're going to create this application. Right? We're going to create an application. We chose single page app. Then we go to the settings tab. And we're going to scroll down to allowed callback URLs. And we're going to put this callback URL in. So here, we're going to go to the settings. We're going to scroll down to allowed callback URLs, and we're going to paste this in here for development mode. Right? Remember we talked about having a callback that after you authenticate with a remote thing, it's going to call you back to somewhere. We're going to make this say localhost 3001 callback. When you're ready to deploy, we're going to add a second URL in here, which would be the name of your deployed application. For now, we're only going to be concerned with development mode. But one of the things you'll do once you're ready to deploy and have people log on to your deployed application, we're going to put the deployed URL in here, right? Yours is probably going to be like sweettweets.herokuapp.com, right, etc. But for now, we're just worrying about development.
Can I ask what's the difference between HTTP versus HTTPS?
S is secured, that all the information that transfers between your browser and the server is encrypted, so that no one can spy on it while it's being transmitted to and from the server. Which is why every time you go to a bank site, you want HTTPS, so no one reads your bank account information, right? HTTP is unencrypted, that anybody who's listening to the Wi-Fi can see everything that goes on. So if you're going to a site and it just says HTTP, I can listen to everything that goes on in that communication. Anybody who's on the same Wi-Fi as you can hear all of that traffic. So if you type in your credit card number into a form that's not HTTPS, somebody in the same Starbucks can read it. But if it's HTTPS, then nobody should be able to read it. Just you and the person you're sending, the site you're sending the information to. HTTPS, secure. The S stands for secure, ostensibly. Cool. So on this page, we need to take note of a couple of things. We need to take note of this domain name. Right? Remember I said you said your domain name, so it's like gstark.auth0.com, and this client ID. So this client ID is how Auth0 knows your application, right? It doesn't know you by sweet tweets or SDG class demo. It knows you as this long client ID number. That's how it knows us. So once you create your application, you probably want to like copy and paste these into a note somewhere so you have them around. And I'll show you where we're going to add that to our app in a minute.
Probably not in the application though.
Well, that we are, because the client ID is public.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, the client ID is public, but the client secret is not. Yeah, and unfortunately, the way we're using Auth0, we don't need the client secret, so we're good. Yes, this is one configuration you can put in your app. You don't have to hide it.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now it's time to configure our client application. So we've gone onto Auth0, we've created an account and a domain, we've created an app for our capstone. Now in our app, now in our combined application, right, I'm in my full stack app client folder, and this is important. Now when we do yarn adds, they should almost always be done in the client folder. After you've integrated your React app and your Rails app together, yarn add and yarn start inside of the client folder. So we're going to yarn add auth0-js. Auth0-js. This is the Auth0 client library that we're going to add to our app. Cool. And then we can yarn start again once we've added that to our project.
For the Windows folks, do we still need to do that?
Yeah, port equals 2001, yarn start. Okay, so now our React application knows about the Auth0 library, but now we need some code to interact with Auth0. So this code here that's in the guide, unfortunately, like all of the white space has been removed, which is bothering me, which I talked to Jason about. I don't know why the white space is gone. This code here is the sample code from Auth0, but we've added some niceties to it. We've made that code a little nicer. So we're going to take that code and we're going to put it inside of the client source directory. Right? This is our client React JavaScript application. And inside the source directory, we're going to make an auth.js. And we're going to include this code in here. I will work with Jason to get the nice white spacing that I put in here so nicely back in, because lack of white space, you can see, really annoys me. And even Prettier doesn't put the white space back in, so I will work with them to get that done. But there's one thing we have to do in here, so we have to put our domain and our client ID in here to configure this. So this is gstark, right? This is my domain. Right? My domain is gstark, and my client ID is this. So I can copy this in the clipboard, and I can paste it in here instead of the xxxxx. So now the auth class that uses the auth0 API is configured with my domain and my client ID. And this class comes with some handy methods that we can use, like log in and log out, and some code to handle authentication. We'll walk through these when we need them, and you'll see where we use them inside of our React code here in a minute. I'll just format this nicely so it looks nice. Cool. So we add this code. We need one more thing. So we need to create a specific file for handling history. So in the same client source directory, we'll create another file called history.js. We're going to create a history.js, and we're going to put this code inside. Oops. We're going to put this code inside. Now that we're using authentication, we need to handle history slightly differently. So now, if we had some routes already, which I think we did in our app, we need to add some routes to work with login, logout, and callback. Right? Log in for the user getting a login prompt, log out to log them out of our site, and the callback so that when the auth0 service says, yes, that person is logged in with their Google, this is who they are, we can find out. So the component that contains our router, which for us is our app.js, here's our router. We're going to import these two files, our auth and our history. So let's bring those files in. We need the auth component so we can log users in, out, and access their profile. The history object is going to allow us to provide history to our router and let our router modify it. Because of that, we're going to change from using browser router to a simple router. So far we've been using this browser router. Now we're just going to import plain old router. So we're going to get rid of the browser router, change your browser router to a simple router. And then our render function, where our router is found, we're going to explicitly provide a history. So in our router, here we'll say history is the history that we just imported. So now that we're using authentication, we've got to upgrade our router a little bit and move away from browser router to a very specific router with a specific history. Now we can add a couple of routes to our application. Let's add a route for login. So here's our route so far. These you can generally do in any order. I sometimes like to put them at the top, like underneath the slash in their own little section here. So let's add a route to log the user in. So we'll add a route here that says if you go to /login, what we're going to do is not render a component. We're going to call a render function. Right? It's going to take a function, and that function just calls the auth code login. So when the user goes to /login, we go to the auth object and call its login method. And as Mark showed us yesterday, this uses auth0 to call its authorize method. This is what's going to bounce us from our application over to Auth0 and present the user their authentication, their login page. Let's add a log out, which is the second route we have here. The log out will call logout here and then return an empty page in case the logout failed. So that's just using auth logout. Auth logout just removes all of the tokens and sends the user to the home page. Right? So it should delete, kind of drop the memory of who they are and send them back to the home page.
I have a question for that. Just right up the function right up above where it was returning an empty page. Oh yeah, sorry, after this. So I've seen with mine just specifically, I have issue with, I get errors thrown with those like bracket syntax. So I wonder would it be okay to just also return an empty div?
You could.
Cool.
Yeah, it just has to return something.
Right.
We probably should do the same thing up here just for safety's sake, but we generally don't have to. Because the login will send us to Auth0. It will do a redirect on its own. Yeah, if the empties are causing you a problem, you can just do div.
Cool. Yeah.
The difference is that this actually doesn't generate any HTML whatsoever, where a div will create an empty div.
Yeah.
If that doesn't bother you, then it's totally fine.
Right.
It's usually okay.
Yeah.
So finally, we need one more route that handles when we get called back from Auth0. Right? So the authentication process is the login takes us to Auth0. Auth0 will automatically know who the user is if they're still logged in, or it will bounce them to Google or GitHub or Twitter or Facebook or whatever you want to log in with. That will take them back to Auth0, and then Auth0 will do a callback to us. Remember in application details, when we set the allowed callback URLs, this /callback here, where's my zoom, right? This /callback here in our Auth0 configuration is the same as our /callback we're about to add here. I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. So loud, right? So this callback is the route that Auth0 is going to send us saying, hey, this user was logged in, right? The route is /callback. What we're going to render here is the auth code handle authentication. Here's handle authentication. It calls the Auth0 library to parse that hash that comes back. And then it says, if there was a result, and that result has an access token, and that result has an ID token, then set this person in the session, and then call any callback we got, and send the user back to the home page. If the login failed, if we didn't have a result and an access token and an ID token, go back to the home page and do a console log of the error so we can debug it. So the handle authentication gives us a callback after a successful authentication. And you'll notice it says here, uncomment the following lines if you are using Axios. So you remember Mark showed us when he was talking about Auth0 that every time we make a request, we have to send that bearer token, right? He had to do the headers authentication bearer token. Well, it turns out that Axios has a way we can say, I'm going to teach you one time to include that header, and then you never have to repeat it on all your other Axios calls, right? So you don't have to remember it. So since we are using Axios, what we will do is we'll uncomment these lines. So once we're authenticated, let's teach Axios that every time you make a request now, you're going to include this authorization header. So if there was successful authentication, I keep saying authorization when I mean to say authorization. If there was a good authorization request, then we come back and set this header. So now in all of our Axios calls, we don't have to repeat that header. I like that. Right? There's one more thing. That callback only happens the one time. Now, every time the user re-navigates, we have to do that same condition. So let's add to our app a component will mount. I should change this to component will mount here. So this says, ask the auth object if they're authenticated, and if they are, Axios, please remember to send that header. So these two sections here, this component will mount with is authenticated, and this handle authentication callback prevents us from having to repeat that header on every Axios call. If you're not using Axios and you're using fetch, which is awesome, you just add that authentication header to every request you send. This is like a little shortcut. That's it for the basic setup of the front end. There's some things we can do to get fancy, and we should cover some of those here. Let's show you what you have to do to the back end to handle the back end half of authentication. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to add another gem to our back end to be able to process JWTs. Okay? Process our JWTs. So in our Rails application, let's bundle add that. So bundle comes with an option to add a library to the gem file. So if you would prefer not to manually edit the gem file and run bundle install, you can use the bundle add command and give it the name of the library you're adding. It has the effect of adding that library to your gem file and automatically running bundle install, and we're good.
Do we use that bundle in the root directory?
Yes. Yes, the Rails command we run in the root directory, and the yarn commands for client we run in the client directory.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I don't think it matters, but it's a good habit. And you'll notice that it added the JWT gem to the bottom of our gem file for us automatically. Even kind of set what the version number should be.
And it should be that, if not, come to you.
The version number part doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah, but the gem JWT should be at the bottom of your gem file.
And going back to the terminal, oh, there it is, never mind. Bundle add JWT.
Bundle add JWT. Cool. So now it's time to add some users to our backend. We need to keep track of some users in the backend. So now it's time to go create our user. Okay? We have not had users in our backend yet, so now we need to generate them. We're not going to create a scaffold for this because we're not going to create an API for managing users. We're just going to have users as a model in our system that we can manage. So you may already have some ideas about things you want to track about a user. I'm going to add some basic information. If you want to extend that with more, you totally can. So I'm going to generate a model, user, and I'm going to add a name and an email and an auth sub. What else do we want to do here? Anything else? Yeah. How about we just do name, email, and auth sub? So name and email are things that are going to get filled in by auth0. So when somebody automatically logs in with auth0, we're going to be able to pull their name. We're going to be able to pull their email. And when I show you how to do image uploads, we'll be able to pull their profile image as well. Okay? But we're going to layer that in once I show you how to deal with image uploads. The auth sub is that subscription number that Mark talked about the other day, is how does auth0 and OAuth really know you? Right? It'll be something like Google Auth and then your Google ID, or Twitter and your Twitter ID. So let's just generate this model for the user. Right? And every time we generate a model, we go check in our project, we go check our DB migrate folder to see if this migration looks right. Okay, we're create table users, name, email, and auth sub, and they're all strings. That looks pretty good to me. So let's Rails DB migrate this.
So the auth sub is supposed to be string, not
Yes.
number.
Correct, string. So now we have our users table. Let's go use our users table. So the very first thing we need to do is teach Rails how do we find the currently active user. Right? Often when we're creating things like yoga classes or events or videos, you want them tied to the user that created them. Right? You want to know who created this yoga pose, so when I log back in, I only see my own yoga poses. Who created that troop, so I can only see my own troops, not somebody else's troops. So there has to be some way of telling Rails, hey, which is the current user? So this code here is what we're going to add to app controllers application controller. So application controller is the parent of all of our controllers. This controller here is every controller in the system has access to these methods. So in our cohorts controller, in our students controller, everybody's going to be able to use this current user method. This is going to be available to every controller in the system because it's a method of the application controller. So what does this code do? It tries to build a user by looking at the authorization token that we just send in from Axios. We make sure it's a string. We split it on a space and we take the last part. Well, why do we do that? Because the format of that authorization token looks like this: bearer, and then all those numbers, right? Remember Mark showed us that really long number, and Manny asked the question, why does it start with the word bearer? Because that's the kind of authorization we have. So if this is what's in the authorization string, if we split it on a space, this turns into an array, bearer, and the second thing is this whole long number, right? And we don't care about the bearer word, we just want the last element of that array. So what we end up getting in this token, right, is just a big old long string. So this one little line here is a little bit like, maybe like a code war kata. If you had a bearer token, how would you split it and get the last part, which is the token? It's this code. Take the request, get the headers. It's a hash, so get the authorization part, turn it into a string, split it on a space, get the last part. Then we're going to use JSON Web Token to verify that token is real. Remember, that's the whole part of the cryptography, make sure no one spoofed the request and we know that Garrett is Garrett, Anastasia is Anastasia. That's going to give us two parts. It's going to give us a payload and a header. And then we're going to ask the user, go search the database for that payload. Do we know this person? If we don't, and we get an error, if we get a verification error or a decode error, right? We went into that JSON Web Token, right, the JUT, and we said, I can't verify who you are, or I couldn't decode what you sent, then the current user is nobody. There's no current user. Right? So this right here is like the security part. Take that authorization token, process it as a JSON Web Token, go try and find it from the hash.
And the authorization, that's just the header.
That's just the header. That's literally the header. It's the same header we're sending here.
Right, okay.
Right? This authorization here in the client is the same thing as this header in the backend. That's how that bridge happens. We're sending that header. Rails is pulling that header out and then using that to go look for the user.
Is that what you were saying about other controllers having this having been globally accessible, so that it can call authorization from that other?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, and you're going to see how we're going to use that here in a second. So, right, this from auth hash is a method that we need to add to the user class. So the user class we just created from our model doesn't have anything for finding users from the JWT profile. So we're going to add this method inside of the user class. So this user method here says we're going to receive a payload hash, and we're going to ask the user, and you may not have seen this find or create by yet, but if you had read some of the active record guides, this is an extra method that we have in addition to new and create and find that we've seen. So if we try user.find1, this is looking up users by ID. And we've seen user.create, where we can give it a name, right, and an email, like this. But what if we were trying to say to the database, please go find this user. If they exist, give them back to me. If they don't exist, please create one. And that's kind of what we want for our authentication. When auth0 says, Anastasia's logging in for the first time, I either want to find her existing account and use that as the current user, or I want to make an account for her automatically and use that as the current user. That's what find or create by does. Find or create by says, look for a user that has this auth sub. Right? Remember, that's the OAuth subscription field. We get that from the payload, and we go looking for a user that has that auth sub. Right? Go look for the user that's got the Google ID 794325575, which is yours, or go find the Twitter auth that's Twitter ID 7977777. That's Garrett. So it goes looking in the database for that auth sub with the sub that we got back from auth0. If we find it, we just return it. Hey, you're Garrett. I'm going to return your account. I already know who you are. If we don't know who you are, we get a chance to make a new user.
Just to reiterate, so the auth sub itself is that that long string, that authentication number that. Okay, cool.
Yep, that is how you're known as OAuth. You're known as the service and your ID on that service.
And then the rest of it is essentially doing like the sign up part for you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So you're not going to have a separate sign up and sign in.
Because I did, and now I know. I
Yeah. So with auth0, the login process is the same as the sign in process.
Okay.
If you have extra things you want the user to provide after the first time they create their account, there are ways we can deal with that.
Right.
But if all you're collecting is name, email, and maybe their profile picture, sign in and sign up are exactly the same.
Okay.
Some capstones have a process where the very first time you log in, there maybe needs to be a form where you provide extra information, extra profile information. If your app is that way, come see me and I will help you add that. But I think for everybody's, I don't think there is any additional things that they need to record other than like name, maybe email, and their picture.
Yeah.
So inside of here is some code for dealing with their picture. We haven't talked about how to download and attach images yet, so that example there is just for you for later. Probably later this week we'll cover image uploading, or video uploading, or PDF uploading, and then we can come back and uncomment this, and then also not only store their name and their email, but also their avatar, if you so care. So let's also record their email. So you'll notice that if this user's, we've never seen their OAuth sub before, we're going to create one, all the code inside of here runs. So this code inside of here only runs on the sign up part, the creating of an account. So when we create somebody, let's take the payload email that we got from OAuth and assign that to their user's email. Let's take the name that they got and assign that to the username and fill that information in automatically. So the very first time you log in with auth0, you'll have a new user account. Your email and your name and your auth sub will automatically be filled in. And if we had picture, your avatar would automatically be filled in by adding this code to the user class. Right? And it's just using a little bit of fancy active record helper methods. If you want to find out more about find or create by, it's in the Rails guides. How does find or create by work? You can look in the Rails guides. So that's what we have to add to the user model. This is what's inside of a payload. So these are all the things that you can pull out. These are pretty common things in here that most OAuth providers give you. Not every OAuth provider will give you every one of these fields, right? Not everybody might give gender or locale, like what language, right? This is an English speaker. This gives given name, family name, and nickname, right? And full name. So for whatever OAuth provider you use, this is the example that comes from Google. So if you're using the default Google, you can use any of these. But Twitter might have a few extra if you decide to sign up for that, right? But this is what's inside of that payload variable. So you see all we're pulling out is name, and we're pulling out, where is it? Email, right? And we could do some like logic. If the email's not verified, do something, etc. This code here is if your user method already existed. So if you had already scaffolded the user, this is how you would add the auth sub to your user model. But we created it by default, right? We created it ourselves. So if you had already had an app that already had a user, maybe you had scaffolded this already, that would add the auth sub to that model.
Do you recommend that we do run Rails generate scaffold, or
just a model?
Just a model, right?
Yeah, because you don't need any controllers for the user. You're not, unless you're going to have profile editing, right? Go in and change your name, change your profile, etc. Then you'll need an API for managing users. But most people, I don't think anything from what I've heard in your apps necessarily have to have that.
Yeah.
If you want to add it, if you like, hey, I've got an extra couple of days and you want to add user profiles, then you can come back and add the scaffold for the user and have an update and a delete, like delete my account kind of thing. That's what you would generate a scaffold for.
Cool.
The last thing we have to do is add a class for processing JSON web tokens, because we don't get one for free. So in our app lib folder, we're going to create a JSON web token.rb file. This is what's going to process the JSON web token from Auth0. So we don't have a lib folder here, so we need to create that. So let's create a new folder called lib inside of app. Then inside of here, let's create a JSON web token file. And we'll place this code inside. And you'll notice there's one place in here to change the our app here. This becomes your domain, gstark, right? This is the same thing here as your domain here. Your domain here. So we created a lib folder inside of app and a JSON web token file inside, and we pasted this code in, and we changed both locations where the app is. Wherever it says our app, we change that to gstark. And this code just uses the JWT library to decode the thing and process the header and decode the hash, and it's got some tech bits in here about processing JWTs. You're welcome to dig in and try and figure out how this code works on your own. Just know that this is what verifies and decodes that JWT into something that we can use. Right? Our application controller uses the JSON web token verify to give us that payload hash. This is the code that does that. Okay? I'm not going to walk through this code because it's not worth walking through. But there's some neat stuff in there if you want to study later.
What is ISS?
That is the essentially the identity of the OAuth provider. It's asking to verify the ISS. So if we look up OAuth ISS, let's see it here. the identifier for the identity provider who issued the token. It's who issued the token. Google issued the token. Twitter issued the token. Facebook issued the token.
So the sub is host?
The sub is who are you. So your sub is your identity. It is Mira's Google account. It is Mira's Facebook account. It's Mira's Twitter account. It's Mira's GitHub account. It's Mira's LinkedIn account. Which provider and user is it is your sub. The ISS is which provider issued that token. And that's GitHub, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Yelp, anybody who's a OAuth provider. The sub is who you are. ISS is who authenticated you. Who's saying you are who you are. Right? Google said it was you. Facebook said it was you. Sub is who you are.
If I want to use like GitHub and Google,
Mm-hmm.
then do I need to add it on the auth 0?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then if you add on, nothing on the code side has to change. Right? That's the nice part about using auth 0 is once we're set up for using auth 0, you just teach auth 0 all the new providers you want to use, and they deal with all of that work. The code that we've added integrates auth 0 with our Rails application. Then auth 0 integrates with Google. Auth 0 integrates with GitHub. And we don't have to worry about any of that. That's the nice part about using something like auth 0. Right? And that's it. That's all we have to do.
What's going to look like for front-end side?
Let's see. I have an error on my front-end side. In my app.js, it says Axios is not defined.
Did you download?
I did, but I have not imported it here. Import Axios from Axios. So now here's my front end. And make sure my Rails server is running. Now, let me go to /login. Is not in the allowed. Oh, did we not put that in there? HTTP localhost 3001 callback. Oh, you know what I never did? I never saved this page. I showed you how to do it, but I never hit save. Silly me. So let's go back and /login. Right? Here I am. Now, if I added more providers, they would be under here. Google, GitHub, Facebook. The user can choose to use an email and password if they want, but I'm telling you, most people are just going to click on login with Google.
Yeah.
If you have the paid version of auth 0, you can customize this page. Otherwise, you just have this page. So I don't think it matters that much, right? You can change the logo and the name, right? That's why like having your name here is good, right? The name of your app. I think this is fine. If you want to go further, you can go further. Notice now it's saying which account you want to log in with.
Yeah.
I'm just going to log in with my personal account. Right now I'm authorizing SDG class demo to use my Google account.
So this is what we're going to be showing the demo in.
This is what your login flow is going
This
to
is
look
the
like.
flow, okay.
Yep. Now I'm logged in. Right? But I really can't tell any difference because we haven't done anything with restricting the information based on who I am. Right? I'm seeing all of the cohorts. Let's use the current user to figure out which cohorts I'm allowed to see. So now there has to be some relationship between a cohort and a user, right? The cohort should be belongs to a user, right? We didn't have that in our model. Maybe you all have started to identify that in your ERDs, right? I think almost all of you have users and belongs to. We didn't have that in ours. So we've already created our user model and our cohort. Now we've got to go back and change. So let's just generate a migration. You likely won't have to do this if you set up your relationships ahead of time. Let's generate a migration called add user to cohort. And what we're going to say is that, oops, we're going to say we're going to add a user belongs to. So we're telling Rails to generate a migration, and Rails will use the name of your migration to assume some information. If it ends in something like to cohort, it should know that we're modifying the cohort, and then we can specify at the end what we want to do. You likely won't have to do this when you generate your cohort, your yoga class, your troop, right, etc., your patterns, right? If you generate them early with your user models already done, then you're going to put the user belongs to as part of your normal ERD work. Right? We didn't do that, so we're adding a migration. So let's go check our migrations. Hey, it inferred, because I said the name of the migration is to cohort, it's going to add a reference of cohorts as the user foreign key true. So there's a really good section in the Rails guides about migrations and how they work. If you get to the point where you realize, ooh, I forgot something in my models, right? You can come to me and I will help you migrate your data, migrate your models, but I had to come and add the user. So now there's a relationship between cohort and user. Let's go tell the user that it has many cohorts, and the cohort belongs to a user. Right? When we create a cohort, it's going to belong to a specific user, the user who created that cohort. That means that users has many cohorts. In your apps, a user will have many troops, will have many yoga classes, will have many patterns, will have many job postings, many videos, etc. Now we've tied cohorts and users together. We go back and run our server, nothing has really happened. Right? I still see all of the cohorts. This is because in my cohorts controller, I'm not restricting anything when I'm looking at all my cohorts or my cohorts where. Right? If I don't have any search, I'm going to find all of the cohorts. Well, I don't want to do that anymore. I only want to find the cohorts for the current user. Aha, for the current user. So instead of saying cohort.all, I can say current user dot cohorts. And instead of saying this, I can say the current user cohorts where.
Cohort is misspelled.
Oh, so yeah, cohorts. Chorts. All the cohorts where, right?
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
So now, yeah, well, thanks for finding the spelling. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So now, rather than list all of the cohorts, I'm only going to list the cohorts that I have created. How does it know the current user? Well, that's that thing we added to the application controller a hot minute ago. Right? The current user is the authenticated user. So when we ask our cohorts controller to list all of the cohorts, it's only going to be the cohorts from the current user. Well, how do we know which current user created the cohort? It means that when we create one, we have to teach the cohort who created it. Same deal. Instead of cohort new, it's the current users cohorts new. Not any cohort new, a new cohort for the current user's list of cohorts. This is what automatically binds, relates that cohort and the user together. Same thing when we look for a cohort down here. We don't want to find any cohort. We only want to consider the current user's cohorts by ID. If we allow the user to destroy any cohort by ID, I could destroy your cohorts, you could destroy Mira's cohorts, Mira, you could destroy Garrett's cohorts, Garrett's, you could destroy Tatiana's cohorts, right? There would be no security. This says the cohort that I'm looking for is only consider my current user's cohorts. So if I knew that Mira had a cohort number 42, I couldn't come into my Axios and say, delete cohort 42, because when I went to go find it, it would say, take Gavin's cohorts and find one with ID 42, and would say, nope. Yeah, there's no cohort for Gavin that has ID 42. When Mira logged in, her current user's cohorts would have a cohort 42, and she would be able to delete it, right? So this small change we made here is all of what adds security for us.
Could you go to just the cohort.ruby, please? So we created the new cohort model in our database. Create the model here in the application, and then just like what we give as the students, essentially.
Yep.
I mean, that's exactly what
Yep. Since you already did your full ERDs to start with, you already have your user and other relationships, so you're in much better shape. The only thing you probably need to add to all of your user ERDs is auth sub. Right? You probably didn't know you needed that auth sub. So all of your user ERDs should have name, email, auth sub. Right? Because that's the bit that tracks the OAuth part. So when you go to generate your models, hopefully now and sometime later this week, when you're ready to ERD to scaffolds, come see me and we'll just make sure that everything is set up, and we'll walk through and make sure your belongs to's and your has many's are all good. I had to do some retroactive work because when I generated cohorts, I didn't know about users, right? I didn't create my user model at the same time that I created my cohorts and my students. You all are lucky because you've thought ahead. So now, hopefully,
user RB.
Which one? User? User has many cohorts, and then has this kind of boilerplate code for trying to find a user by their authentication hash. So likely your user model will have this code, and it will has many whatever your applications are about. Has many troops, has many yoga classes, has many videos, has many patterns. Right? This part up here will be dependent upon your project. This part here is kind of boilerplate.
So conventionally, the below two comes first. Before has many.
Say that again?
Below two come first.
No, the order of those don't matter. By convention, we tend to put our belongs to's and has many's before any other code, but the order of belongs to and has many doesn't really matter. There's no convention for that. It's just usually typically the has many's and the belongs to are the first thing in the file, and then validations, then other code. That's a fairly good convention. Cool. So let's see if this code in the cohorts controller is now preventing us from finding the other cohort. So if I reload this page, there are none. Right? They're still in the database, but they belong to nobody, so I can't see them. So let's create a cohort. Gavin's personal Google account cohort. And it starts on a date, and it ends on a date. Right? There it is. Now, if I log out, right, there's nothing there. Now let me log in as my Suncoast Developers Guild account. Right? Now if I create this one, here. Right? So now I see this one because I'm logged in as my SDG account. If I log out here and log in again as my personal account, log in as my personal account, I only see the personal ones. Right? And even if I tried to click on this one and then delete, right? Let's see, the other one was, if this is my personal one, then cohort 9 should be the other one, right? It doesn't find that cohort. Now, we don't have any error handling in our code, right? So this came back as no cohort. We probably need to add some error handling now, right? If someone tries to find a cohort that exists but is not for them, right? But as my personal Google account, I can find cohort 8, even though cohort 9 exists. Rails console cohort find 9. It's there, but I can't see it. Right? It's secured away from me because in the cohorts controller, when I tried to find it by ID, it's only scoped to my cohorts. Let's add a little bit to the user interface. Let's add. We're doing Bootstrap. So let's do a little navigation bar, and let's add a login and logout. Not examples, documentation, components, navigation. Nav bar. Let's add a really simple navigation bar. Where's a really simple one? I want a really simple one. Like this. So in our app, at the top above this, let's add this nav. So let's just fix it like this. We gotta change all these class equal to class names equal to. So let's see, do we have a little nav bar now on the top? Yeah, we do. All right, so that means I can probably get rid of this Jumbotron because that looks now kind of weird. All right, so now we have a little navigation at the top. Let's come into the navigation, and instead of an A tag, we'll use a link. Link to is to slash, and the class name is navlink, and the text is home, and this, and then this is going to become a link to /login. We can get rid of the href. We call this login link. We can make this a link to /logout, and we don't need this href. And then the rest of these examples, let's just get rid of. So I'm just adding some login, logout to the nav.
Logout for parsing?
Oh yeah, logout. Right. So home takes me home, and logout should log me out. Login should log me in.
So do you think we all need nav bars?
You need some login and some logout button somewhere in your page. Right. So the problem now is once I've logged out, it's still showing me information because it did not send me back to the home page this way. So Let's add something here to only show me login if I'm logged out and logged out if I'm logged in, right? So let's make a little method here, render login or logout. Oops, what happened? Let's make a method render login or logout. So the purpose of this will be to show me if I'm logged in, show me a logout link. If I'm logged out, show me a logged in link. So let's copy both of these links in here. Right? These two LIs. This is my login and my logout. Yours may be buttons, right? They may be in a nav bar. It's whatever your structure is. You probably already have somewhere in your design a login and a logout button. If not, maybe you need to add one. So here, if the user is logged in, right, I want to return this. Otherwise, sorry, if the user is logged in, then I want to log out. So let me flip these around here in a second. If the user is logged in, show the logout button. Otherwise, show the login button. My prettier is broken. Why? Oh, because this doesn't make any sense. So if the user is logged in, show the logout button. Otherwise, show the login button. Well, I have my auth class. And it has a method in here called isAuthenticated that returns a true or a false. So if the user is authenticated, show the logout. Otherwise, show the login. Now in our user interface, I have to use that code down here. Instead of having the two login and logout buttons, I will just have one call to this.render login or logout. Right? Rather than have the two buttons in there, I'll have one method that gets called with an if statement. If authenticated, show me an li for logout. So now I have a login. Once I log in, why did we not get? That's interesting. I had to refresh the page to see the logout. I wonder why that is. Let's check our auth here. So one thing in the auth you'll notice is, I think I know why. So in handle authentication, if we're logged in, it's doing a history replace. Let's make this a push. So this part right here with history tells us where to go once we're successfully logged in. This tells us where to go when we're successfully logged out. You may have a splash page and a separate route for your home page, right? You can change these URLs. I think the replace versus the push is causing me to do that. Let's see. Let's log out. No. Let's log in. Log in with Google to my personal account. There's my login, but if I refresh, I see logout. Push, logged in. I should be logged in. It's authentic.
This stuff authorize?
Yeah. I don't want to refresh the page.
Yeah, I thought there was like a special thing you can write where it eliminates that.
Yeah, the challenge is that I'm ending back up on this page. Let's see if we can debug it. So let's console.log auth.is authenticated. So this should give us like a true or a false if we're authenticated or not. So here it says Here it says true. Let's log out. Aha, we didn't get this again. We didn't get this again because it pushed us back to this page, and I refresh and it says false. Let's log in. We end up here, and it says false. But if we refresh the page, it says true. I'm not sure. I will have to look into why we have to refresh that for it to recognize. Like here, when we log out, right? It's refreshing the page, but this true still happens. It should be able to ask the is authenticated again. It's probably not re-rendering the page. I will look into it.
Is there an add and respond to JS in your controller a good way to avoid that?
No.
Okay.
No. It's not re-rendering the page because it's, right, React tries to be smart and only re-renders the page when state changes.
Yeah.
And the authentication is kind of on the side of state. So I'm going to have to research why that's not refreshing. What should happen after we log out is that this should no longer be here and the login should be here.
Yeah.
It's likely something that we're missing here, and I'm not sure what
On
it
that
is.
zero authorize, it's like right down. It's if you go scroll down, it's like this .auth0 authorize. Which one's that calling?
This is calling the auth0 library.
Okay.
So our auth login is calling the auth0 library authorize.
Okay. So that's on there like end.
Yes, that's what's causing the redirect to the auth0 page and showing us that nice auth0 login page.
That's the client ID. That's just.
Yeah, that's our little secret number.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah, and our domain. Because what we should be able to do also is, right, we should be able to, in our, where's our list of cohorts, right? We should also prevent this from showing if there was nobody, right? Our login and refresh. On break, I will look that up in case there's something missing from our setup. And if so, then I will add another note to this lecture. Because this should now say true, but it's not re-rendering the page to show us that, but if I refresh the page, then it is showing that to us. So something is a little bit weird there. And I think it's because the React page is not re-rendering, and I have to look up why that is. But if there is something we've got to do for that, I will just add it to the lecture. The most important part is all the things that are in here are what integrates OAuth to our front end and our back end. And then adding our login and logout buttons to our interface where they need to be, wherever you've designed your login and your logout parts. Right?
Can I say auth.js?
This is copied from the guide right here. That code is this code right here. In the React app, we made an auth.js. We copied all of this.
What is URI?
Where do you see URI?
Redirect URI.
URI and URL are almost the same thing. There's a very small difference between URL and URI. This is where auth0 should call once it's done. This is telling auth0 when you're done authenticating the person, come back to the current host via the current protocol to the callback URL. What we call URLs and URIs are actually, there's a little bit of a technical difference between them. A URL is the minor part, and the URI is the entire part, including the host and the protocol. But they tend to get used interchangeably. Trying to find an example of URI versus UMDN. Right? If you look through the MDN on URI versus URL, it will tell you the difference between those two. They often get used interchangeably though, because there's the difference between them technically isn't super important. Right? So this is probably one of the later things you want to do in your app, is integrate authentication, right? Because we can layer it in. You want to probably start building the API for listing yoga classes, listing patterns, troops, etc., and then layer in the authentication at the end. Because the trick is, even if you don't finish authentication, right, you can still show your app working. So some students get hooked on getting the authorization in first, right? I'd rather see you have some of your features work, because even if you don't finish authentication, you could still use your app to manage your troops and your events, even without it.
That's true.
Right. So it's a nice thing to have. I like that you all have users in your app. That's great. But I would like to see you start making some of your pages dynamic before layering in this, right? Same kind of thing if you get to this point, right, and you walk through it, come see me, and I will help you again walk through the process if you get stuck following the guide. But this should pretty much walk you through, and I will look up why this is not refreshing the right way. Some small technical bit is missing from the setup, and I don't remember what it is.
I was wondering about auth sub for users, because I thought I haven't really started the scaffold or any of the other ones, but if you have, excuse me, the
Here's my users.
auth sub field, because at this point I'm creating it that, I mean, it's created on the end. Where is that? That's coming from OAuth itself, and so that's being. So if like if I'm just manually creating this data, then I'll just have to find.
You won't be able to find the auth sub.
Right. So by this point, I will be having the API and everything.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's go take a look at the first user in our system. This is Gavin, whose email is gavin@gstark. Look at my auth sub. Google OAuth 2 and this really long number.
Yeah, there I did.
This is what Google knows me as. Google does not know me as Gavin. Google knows me as 113743542 blah 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 blah. Right? Let's go look at the last user in the system. Right? This is not Gavin@gstark. This is Gavin at Suncoast. It knows me as 11422. So 11422 is my Gavin at Suncoast account. 11374 is my Gavin@gstark.com. That's my personal account. So this is what really identifies you, is this auth sub. That's why we have to have that additional auth sub field column on our users table.
So if we were, say, trying to link up like Facebook, would we have to, other than upgrading, I guess, through the service?
We don't have to upgrade for that.
Oh, okay.
The only thing you can't do with the free service is customize that landing page.
Oh, right.
If we come in and we come in here to the application, into the connections, right? All we have so far is a connection for Google. If you come into connections, go back to applications and go to connections here and go to social. Look at all the ones we can use. Oh my goodness. It goes on and on and on. So, hey, look, here's Twitter. So for your account, for your app, you probably want to turn this on, right? And what you've got to do is how to create a consumer key. You're gonna have to follow this guide to setting up Twitter.
I think I already did that.
Okay.
I already set up a Twitter.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. But you probably have not set up like a Twitter application and a Twitter client secret.
No.
So
just
you're
for the page.
yeah. So you've got the Twitter account,
Yeah.
but now you have to go through this whole setup for OAuth.
Okay.
So when you're ready to add Twitter, you're going to come into your OAuth account, go to Connection Social Twitter, turn this on, go through the setup.
Cool.
If you want to add anything more than Google, if you want Facebook, Microsoft, GitHub, there's a couple of extra hoops you have to jump through on OAuth side. I'm sorry, on Auth0 side. They're usually pretty straightforward. I don't think it's worth it unless you have a very specific social network you're trying to do.
Yeah.
If you want to do Google and you were going to add more, I would probably add Facebook and or GitHub. Because it might be that someone who wants to try your app does not have a Google account, but maybe they do have a Facebook account, or if they're a developer, they probably have a GitHub account. Those would be the ones that I would hit next. But I think sticking with Google is fine.
Like near GitHub would be perfect for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's for
Developers focused.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But just remember that even if they don't want to use a social logon, they can just create an account. They can click on sign up and use an email and password. So you don't have to have any social account because they can sign up with a username and password. So sticking with the default Google is fine. If you want more, certainly add more. You just have to go through the steps to do it. That's all.
For that login, log out thing, it says something about having a refresh token and the usage for single page login flow. You're gonna have to do something with silent authentication.
No, that's still what we're doing here.
Is that still what we're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because what's happening now is when we log out.
Redirect.
Oops, I logged in again. Right. When I log out, for some reason, it's still, if I look at the console, thinks I'm logged in until, right. Actually, see, it still thinks I'm logged in.
Yeah.
Log out. Yeah.
Is that not working?
But if I refresh, then it knows I'm logged out. Yeah. So I will do a little bit of research when we're on break and see if we can figure out what it is.
Is it because of the route?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Seems like that.
Maybe.
We already changed the long name to short name.
We added a route for login. We added a route for log out.
Right.
But the log out should be, let's do this. Let's see if log out is doing this navigate push. Without a console log to see if we're actually going to our log out. Log in, Google, yeah, see now, here's our log out button.
So app.js at 23 is true.
Yes.
Yes.
Now it's saying app.js line 23, which is our, up here we're saying, hey, are we authenticated? Should we show the log out or log in button? And what we're hoping when we log out is that we see this log out.
Yeah, that's the.
Yeah, here's our log out.
There it is. And log out is the button's still there.
Cannot update render method. We're getting an error.
Yay.
Cannot update during existing state transition, such as within render.
Oh,
Render
because-
methods should be a pure function of props and state.
So add authenticated to the state.
No, I don't think so. I think what's happening is we're trying to do this push, and this push is failing.
Uh,
Do we change like this state history? Close
No,
that.
I don't think so. Let's see what happens here. Let's see if we get that after the history. Let's log in.
I just want to debug this right now. It's bothering me.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's log in. Okay. And let's refresh the page. And let's log out.
Okay.
No, it is
Okay,
saying
yeah, it says.
after history. So the other thing we could do is, rather than this history, is we could do, I don't think this is right. This is a more forceful redirect.
I think that's what I was thinking about, a forceful redirect.
Yeah. I don't think it's the right answer, but let's see if it works.
Yeah.
So let's sign in. Let's get signed in. And then let's log out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's entirely the right answer, but I will, that's like leading us towards the right path.
Yeah.
So I will do a little bit of research on the break and then let you know.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to do a review at 3. I just work on your capstones and then I'm around to answer questions and we'll go from there. And I will find out what the right answer is here.
Yeah.
I do remember window